Welcome to the Inner Compass Podcast Show. I am your host, Jackson Ogo, and thank you for joining us on episode 9 of the Inner Compass Podcast Show. In this episode, we're exploring the power of self-accountability and ownership. What does it really mean to take ownership of your actions, and how is that different from blame and guilt? How can you tell when you're avoiding responsibility and when you might be carrying weight that was never yours to begin with? We'll also dive into an important question. How do you hold yourself accountable while still practicing self-forgiveness? The missed deadline. Jordan stared at the email on his screen. Hey, I was just checking in. Were you able to finish the report? He hadn't. The deadline was yesterday. His first instinct was to blame the chaos of the week. Too many meetings, unclear instructions, the unexpected call from his mom. But deep down he knew. He'd put it off, scrolled a little too long, avoided it because it felt overwhelming. For a moment, shame crept in. I always do this. I mess things up. But then, Jordan paused, took a deep breath, and decided to respond differently. He replied, Hey, I missed the deadline. No excuses. I let it fall through the cracks. I take full responsibility. I'm already working on it, and I'll have it to you first thing tomorrow. If there's anything I could do to make up for the delay, let me know. It wasn't easy to send, but the moment he did, something lifted. Not guilt, ownership. Owning it didn't mean Jordan was a failure. It meant he was growing. He didn't spiral, he corrected. And that, more than perfection, is what accountability looks like. What is accountability and how does it differ from blame and guilt? Accountability is the act of taking responsibility for your actions, choices, and their outcomes, both good and bad. It means owning your role in a situation without deflecting, denying, or making excuses. Being accountable doesn't mean you're perfect. It means you're honest, self-aware, and willing to grow from your experiences. Here's how accountability differs from blame and guilt. Accountability focuses on learning and forward movement. It's rooted in self-honesty and integrity. It encourages growth, repair, and change. And it sounds something like, I made a mistake, I see what I did, and I'm working to make it right. On the other side, blame is about assigning fault, often with judgment or shame. It can be externalized like, it's your fault, or internalized like, I'm always the problem. And it keeps people stuck in defensiveness or victimhood. It sounds something like, this happened because of them, or it's my fault, I ruined everything. And finally, guilt is a feeling you get, not a behavior. It comes from a belief that you violated your own values. If it's a healthy guilt, it leads to accountability, but if harmful, it becomes self-punishment. It sounds something like, I feel bad about what I did, which can be a cue to take responsibility and repair. To sum this up, accountability is proactive because it's about owning your impact and committing to do better. Blame is reactive because it focuses on fault over solutions. Guilt is emotional. It could either fuel growth or feed shame, depending on how it's handled. How do we recognize when we're avoiding responsibility? Avoiding responsibility is when someone refuses consciously or unconsciously to acknowledge or own their role in the situation, decision, or outcome. Recognizing when we're avoiding responsibility is a powerful step towards personal growth and self-awareness. Avoidance can be subtle and often shows up in ways that feel justified or protective. Why do we avoid taking responsibility? We avoid taking responsibility not because we're lazy or uncaring, but because we're trying to protect ourselves, usually without realizing it. Avoidance often comes from fear of failure, judgment, rejection, or shame. Here's a few key signs to help you recognize when you avoid taking responsibility. Blaming others. You find yourself pointing fingers even when you played a part. If they hadn't done that, I wouldn't be in this mess. It's not my fault. It was outside of my control. Making constant excuses. You have valid reasons, but they're often used to dodge accountability. Look out for phrases like, "I didn't have time," "That's just how I am," "It wasn't clear what I was supposed to do." Deflecting with humor or silence. You laugh off mistakes or stay silent instead of addressing them. This avoids discomfort but leaves the issue unresolved. Waiting for others to fix it. You delay actions hoping someone else steps in or takes the lead. A form of passive avoidance that shifts responsibility outward. Downplaying your role. You minimize your involvement on its impact. You say things like, "It wasn't that big of a deal," or "I only played a small part." And finally, feeling defensive when challenged. You react strongly or shut down when someone gives feedback. This may be a signal that you're not ready to own your own part. Here's a few self-reflection questions to help catch avoidance behavior. Am I focusing more on who to blame than what can I do now? Is there a part of me that feels embarrassed, afraid, or shame to admit my role? What am I afraid will happen if I take full responsibility? Avoiding responsibility may be safer in the short term, but in the long run, it stunts growth, strains relationships, and chips away at self-respect. True empowerment begins when you choose ownership over avoidance. Where's the line between healthy ownership and taking on burdens that doesn't belong to us? The group project. Marcus was always the one who held it together. In school, he was the guy who finished the group project when no one else showed up. At work, he was a team player who stayed late, fixed other people's mistakes, and never complained. So when the report went sideways, full of errors, late to the client, and missing key data, Marcus did what he always did. He apologized, took the blame, and said, "I should have double-checked everyone's section. I'll fix it." His manager thanked him. The others stayed quiet. That night, Marcus sat up at his desk, exhausted and angry, not at them but at himself. Why was he always the one cleaning up? He opened his laptop to fix the report, but instead, he opened a blank page and wrote one question. What's truly mine to own, and what's not? He thought about it. Yes, he could have spoken up earlier. He could have asked for support. But the errors wasn't his. The silence wasn't his. The lack of accountability from his team wasn't his. He had confused responsibility with rescue. So, the next day, instead of fixing it all alone, he said, "I'm happy to help clean this up, but each one of us needs to own our own part." And for the first time, he didn't feel selfish. He felt free. Because healthy ownership means showing up with integrity, not carrying everyone else's weight while shrinking your own worth. Healthy ownership is when we take responsibility for our own actions, choices, words, and impact. It's grounded in self-awareness and self-accountability. But when we start absorbing responsibility for the things outside of our control, other people's emotions, mistakes, decisions, or healing, that's when ownership becomes a burden. Here's how to tell the difference. Healthy ownership looks like admitting when you're wrong, apologizing and making amends when appropriate, reflecting on how your behavior affects others, and taking initiative to grow and change. Unhealthy burdens look like keeping responsibility, feeling responsible for how others feel or react, apologizing for things you didn't do to keep the peace, taking the blame to avoid conflict or discomfort, and trying to fix or rescue others at the expense of your own well-being. When diagnosing where the fine line lies between healthy ownership and taking on burdens you shouldn't own, ask yourself, did I actually cause or contribute to this problem? Am I trying to fix this because I feel guilty or because it's truly mine to fix? Is this responsibility mine, or am I stepping in to avoid discomfort or avoid letting someone else fail? And would I expect someone to do the same for me? The bottom line is that it's compassionate to care, but it's wise to set boundaries around what you carry. You can be supportive without becoming responsible for someone else's healing, choices, or outcomes. Healthy ownership empowers growth. Taking on others' burdens create burnout, resentment, and emotional imbalance. How do we forgive ourselves while still taking ownership? Self-forgiveness and accountability aren't opposites. They're partners in healing and growth. Forgiving yourself doesn't mean pretending nothing happened. It means acknowledging your actions with honesty and then choosing to release the shame that keeps you stuck. Here's how to do both. Acknowledging what happened without excusing it. Be honest about your choices and behaviors. Own your own part clearly without minimizing or blaming. I made a mistake. I hurt someone. I avoided something important. But don't confuse accountability with self-condemnation. You're owning what happened, not who you are as a person. Separate your behaviors from your worth. You are not your worst moment. You can regret an action and still believe in your right to grow. Mistakes are lessons, not life sentences. Make amends where you can. If your actions affected others, apologize with sincerity and clarity. Make changes to prevent repeating the same harm. That's real accountability. Even if the other person doesn't forgive you, you could still forgive yourself by learning, changing, and honoring the weight of your impact. And finally, let guilt fuel growth, not self-sabotage. Use the guilt as a signal, not a weight. Let it guide you to reflect, realign, and do better, not to define who you are. You don't have to choose between owning what you did and loving who you are. You can do both. Forgiveness is not about forgetting. It's about remembering and choosing to move forward with more wisdom, more humility, and more heart. Accountability is the foundation of trust, and ownership is the key to growth. When we take full responsibility for our actions, we empower ourselves to change and improve. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Inner Compass Podcast Show. Today, we explored the power of self-accountability, how owning your own actions without shame or blame is one of the most empowering things we could do. We talked about how to recognize when we're avoiding responsibility, the difference between healthy ownership and carrying burdens that aren't ours, and how forgiveness fit into the process. Remember, taking responsibility isn't about perfection. It's about growth, honesty, and reclaiming your power. If this episode resonated with you, take a moment today and ask yourself, what's truly mine to own and what isn't? And speaking about ownership, next week we're talking about one of the most essential tools for protecting your energy and honoring your truth, boundaries. Join me next time as we explore why setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's necessary. Until next time, my friends, stay grounded, stay honest, and keep following your inner compass. Thank you.